Hey, good morning again. We have some new intro music that we're starting with this week with. Today, well, first I wanted to thank everybody for coming back and joining these sessions. For those who haven't joined before, my name's Jason Short, and I'm part of the product management team. Joined here today with Deepak, who's also part of our product management team, and we'll get into Patch in a minute because he's really the star of the show today. But we're about to kick off a series of 4 sessions specifically on Patch. And we're going to make a little bit of a change the way we do these moving forward. And so we have today, we're going to talk about OS patch best practices. Monday, we'll do third-party patch. Tuesday we'll do third-party patch. Wednesday we'll go through reporting but then on the next Thursday, and starting from this point on, Thursdays is going to be a bit longer episode, about 30 or so minutes. So every week we're going to do a theme, and at the end of that last day is as a big Q&A session. So instead of a 15-minute, we'll do the same 15 minutes like we always do of a best practice, and in this case, it'll be troubleshooting, and then we'll open up to Q&A, live Q&A with a couple of members of the PM team, really to focus on that subject, which next week is Patch. So it's a little change to our format. Again, you probably would like to get to the meat of this, so let me turn it over to Deepak, who's going to go really talking about best practice for OS patch, most importantly, why certain settings give you a different result in terms of patch compliance. So take it away, Deepak.
Thanks so much, Jason. Yeah, so I think the key piece here is, right, we're going to talk about the best practices specifically for OS patching, setting up your OS patching policy. So let's take a look at some data before we even go any deeper here. So why is patch policy automation the key to success, right? When you look at the data that I'm presenting here, this is Microsoft Server patching scores for the year 2024. And what you'll see here are 2 lines. So the red line represents endpoints which are not enabled for patching, and the green line represents endpoints which are enabled for patching. So what we're comparing here are their Microsoft compliance score, or what are the total number of patches installed on them compared to what is being offered by Microsoft. We're not keeping policy or any settings in place. We're just comparing how these endpoints basically match up next to each other. So these group of endpoints, if you see there, right, you'll see those dips on like 11th of January, 1 year, 14th or 13th of February, where we have your Patch Tuesday. So from the time Patch Tuesday arrives, that is when new patches comes in, the scores dip down, right? New patches are being offered. You'll see that throughout the cycle of a month, the scores don't really increase that much more. For example, if you look at the red line, it basically goes just from like 72% or so to maybe 75%. That's like on an average a 2 to 3% increase. Compare that with the green line, you'll see about a 5 to 6% increase in the patch compliance. So that really shows that having a policy in place really is helping the endpoints get more compliant with more patches. And mind you, we are not even comparing that with the policy compliance. So if I then add the policy compliance here as an additional line, you'll see that the yellow line, that represents your policy compliance score, which is what is installed on the endpoint as compared to the policy that has been set up. So if something just has endpoints we just have security updates, we're just deploying them, getting them to 100%. And you'll really see that the numbers start shining, especially around the end of the cycle, where if you look at end of March, the endpoints have an average compliance of about 90%. So this really key difference, this really shows the key difference between having a policy set up, making sure that the deployment is happening automatically versus maybe doing it outside of the RMM or doing it through manual patch deployment. You can see dips over there, which is where the ConnectWise patch approval kicks in, right? We have a 1-week patch approval cadence. So when that kicks in, and again, towards the end of March, you'll see that those numbers are really going up to like 90%. So that's really the goal here. Now, let me switch over to the portal here and see, what's the best sort of a policy to set up. So here I am on the settings page for policy. And what we'll do is we'll try to create a policy, and I'll walk you through the best settings that you can apply on your endpoint. Depending on the endpoints that you want to assign, you can either choose a server or a desktop policy. Because desktops have more settings, I will stick to talking about the desktop settings, but I will talk about the specifics of the server settings as well with each option. When we talk about the policy, there are specifically 3 key areas within a policy that you want to, that we basically show to you. Number 1 is whether or not you want to turn on your automation, and within automation, the information of what you want to deploy. So we'll get to the notification and the reboot part in a minute, but the key pieces here are what are the patches that you want to deploy. So what patch classification, OS upgrades, Mac updates, what do you want to get deployed? When do you want to deploy them? That is your schedule. And then all the other settings. Today we are limited by the the reboot options, but we will be adding more options in future. So stay tuned for that. But this is basically the main group of settings that we have. Now, in terms of your policy itself, you want to make sure that your policy automation is turned on, which will open up these settings for you. And then let's try talking about let's try going through these these classifications that are available. So for each of these classifications, you have a bunch of different options. Do not deploy is as good as saying, don't patch me for this classification. Don't score or don't show my compliance score for this classification. That's not what we want for security updates. Obviously, that's where your vulnerabilities are getting patched. You can do assessment only as well, which is only score based off of only score based off of what you see. Don't try to do any deployment. You can do a deploy all, which is if you see the patch, it's missing, just get it deployed on my endpoint. Or the best option here would be to deploy only partner or NOC approved. So the ConnectWise approvals play a key role in making sure things are more efficient and you're getting the best out of your patching without impacting your endpoints. So for security updates, we really recommend that you stick with deploy only partner or NOC approved. I know it says deploy partner approved, but because the NOC is approving patches, the ConnectWise approvals do kick in. The security updates are sort of covered when you apply this setting. Beyond that, you have your critical updates, updates classification, and feature update. So for critical updates, again, your bug fixes come in. You do want to keep it mostly as deploy all, because if you set it as deploy only partner approved, keep in mind the ConnectWise approval only applies to security updates. So if you keep it as deploy only partner approved, you would have to go in and do those approvals. Now, there may be scenarios where you want to do that, but the best case is you keep it as deploy all to ensure that these bug fixes that come in every month are getting deployed correctly. The same applies to update classification as well. Our recommendation is you select the deploy all option as the best practice here. Next up is a big one, which is feature updates. This is something that we introduced sometime last year where we allow you to basically automate your feature update deployment. Over here, the most recommended option is to do a deploy all. Now, this will differ based off of your customer requirements. So if you have customers who have business applications that may break with new feature updates or with new OS versions coming in, you may want to stick to doing deploy only partner approved, but that just means you will have to be the one looking in the portal, making sure that the feature updates or the upgrade classifications are approved, and then you can go through those versions that are available by Microsoft. The reason why we recommend going for deploy all is through Windows Update API, the upgrades that are available are only for endpoints which are outside of the Microsoft support. So for endpoints that are outside of the Microsoft support, you're not going to be getting security updates. Those endpoints will be vulnerable. So the best way to move forward to ensure that these endpoints keep receiving updates is to do a deploy all. For the other 4 options, apart from update rollups, which are, let's say, Microsoft updates for remediations, you may want to just keep it as either deploy only partner approved or keep it as deploy all. But that is, that's completely your preference or your customer preferences. It is fine if you want to keep it as do not deploy and you go through a manual patch deployment for update rollup so that you don't have to worry about any business applications failing. We do not recommend that you enable drivers unless there's a specific need, in which case you can actually do a manual patch deployment of drivers, which is a better option. And the same applies to feature packs as well. You can keep it as do not deploy. It's not going to have that much more of an impact on your endpoints patching. Right. All right. So I'll keep it here. Okay. Next up is OS upgrades. So OS upgrades apply both for Windows and Mac endpoints. So these are version upgrades from, let's say, Windows 10 to Windows 11, or from Mac version from maybe Monterey to Ventura or to Big Sur. So you keep going up the version with the upgrades option. This is basically up to your choice. So similar to feature update, this is based off of your client's requirement. If you want to keep your machines upgraded to the latest version, there is not a problem with keeping machines behind version as long as the OS, the security updates are being offered on these endpoints. Because OS upgrades, again, work through your Windows Update API, and for Mac, it's based off of what's being offered, you can keep it on, and we will treat them similar to how we treat your feature updates and get them deployed. Next up, we have Mac updates. So if you are managing Mac endpoints, you can turn this on. There isn't a lot of setting within Mac. It's whether or not you want all these patches to get deployed or not. So this covers basically, what you want to deploy. The big piece of, success with patching depends on how you set up your scheduling. Because we have a good control over patching, we have actually an option to break up how these actions are performed. So you can control when you want your downloads to happen, when you want your installs to happen, and when you want machines to be rebooted. Downloads happen automatically in the background, and there's very little to no impact on an endpoint. Our recommendation is always to keep it as immediately. We do see a lot of customers going and maybe setting up their download schedules so that it's maybe once a day or in certain high frequency schedules. That is also perfectly fine. What you want to avoid over here is to keep it very infrequent, something like once a week or maybe once a month. What ends up happening in those scenarios is on that day of that month or on that day of the week, all your endpoints are going to be starting downloads together, which can put an immense load on the on your network, depending on how many endpoints you have over there. So keep it immediately. Allow endpoints to maybe get those downloads. Keep them ready for installation whenever they are online. That's the recommendation here. Similar to that, we have our install option. You can keep it as immediately. That is the best way. But obviously, that has a little bit of an impact on the endpoint, because when patches are getting installed, the endpoints can have some amount of slowness. But what we recommend for desktops is to have it something like every day or every other day during your client's off hours. So something like 12 a.m. to say 9 a.m. in the morning, right? Something like this allows for installation of all of these patches when the download gets completed. What you'll see with a setup like this is even if the installation fails with the first attempt, the next time around when the patch is still missing, your download will again, maybe if it's not occurred, it will occur again, or if it's already downloaded, it'll just try the installation again. This allows for maximum success of the patch getting installed on the endpoint. With reboots, you may want to be a little bit mindful of how frequently you keep it. We allow for a daily deployment of feature updates as a minimum, but we ideally recommend that you keep it maybe once a week. Feature updates and OS upgrades aren't offered that frequently. And because feature update deployment does take a little bit of time and has a significant load on the endpoint and has a higher failure rate, mind you, we recommend that you keep it more like 7 days, every 7 days, or something like every, if you know that your clients are going to be available, you can keep it every Saturday or Sunday. So every 1 week on a Saturday and Sunday. And we ask for like a 10-hour window for that deployment. Next up, reboots. Now, reboots are needed for patches that are staged and then require a reboot to get completely installed. So in this case, the recommendation is always to have it at a scheduled time based off of your client's requirement. There may be scenarios where for desktops, you can have a much more frequent cadence. But again, similar to your feature update, you can, because this is a maintenance task, you may want to keep it something like over the weekend, so every 1 week on Saturday and Sunday. So this sort of is a middle ground. The best way forward, or the best way would be every day during your business hours. That would be the best way to handle this. We do have a new option available as part of our recent releases, which is the always reboot endpoint. So even if the endpoints don't require a reboot, just as part of your maintenance, right? If your end users aren't rebooting their endpoints, you have this option so that you don't need to set up a separate task just to get those endpoints rebooted. During your scheduled window itself, you'll perform the reboots and get those machines up and running. And last up, we have the option to notify the user before initiating the reboot. Now, this is very important to prevent the end users losing productivity time. So if you have a very frequent reboot window, just like this, and that is perfectly fine to keep it this way, because now you have an option to notify the user. So you can give an option, or you can enable this option, which will basically pop up a window on the right-hand side of the desktop that says, your machine is about to get rebooted. So the user will have an option to either postpone the reboot or try to, click on reboot now and get that machine rebooted. You can customize this reboot. We have, like I said, we have minimum customization available now. We will be providing more customization options in future. So what you have here as a default is basically the best practice here. Depending on how much this annoys your user, you may want to modify this. But if your users are averse to getting rebooted, we would really recommend that you keep this with a minimum cadence of 1 hour, so that they are reminded that every hour that, hey, this machine needs to be rebooted. So keep that in mind. Right, so that being said, this covers the settings that we have for within policy. Let's just quickly recap on what are the big do's and don'ts. So the big piece here is, after you create your policy, make sure you assign it to a package or a policy group. Don't just create a policy and leave it. That action is needed to make sure things are applied. Use the NOC recommendation or ConnectWise recommendation for security as much as possible. That's a big value add, and you will find things getting more efficient. Keep your downloads as frequent as possible. That has no impact on endpoints. More installation attempts for better results and for better success, and enable reboot notifications to avoid the users who are getting disrupted. In terms of the things that you want to avoid overlapping schedules with each other. So don't have your downloads and your installs all starting at the same time. You may want to sort of gap them by maybe a few hours to allow the downloads to get completed and then trigger the installation. This will prevent maybe a couple of days or a specific day getting skipped because both download and installation schedules came at the same time, conflicting each other. Don't set deploy partner approved if you do not plan on approving your patches. That would just dip your compliance score and add additional work that you may not intend to do. And then don't set the user delay for reboot too long. This could end up creating a scenario where the end user may probably never reboot their machines, or whatever the patch was staged could get failed because of the delay in the time the machine got rebooted. And last but not least, make sure to provide a reboot schedule. So feature updates do require a reboot schedule. Same is the case with OS upgrades. So if you don't provide a reboot schedule, those OS upgrades will be stuck in a staging state and will never get installed, and you'll see a high number of failures. All right, I know I went a little bit longer than expected, but I hope I covered sorry, all of the questions that you had. So join us next time on next Tuesday, where we'll be talking more about third-party patching policy. And after that, we're going to talk about some troubleshooting, and a bunch more stuff is coming in for patching.